Assignment number 2 concerns depth of field in our images. Depth of field is how deep a focus you have from near to far, and it changes with the aperture or f-stop of the lens. Now there's a confusing part here in that the larger the number, the smaller the hole, and the larger the number, the more depth of field. So in this first example, which I shot at f2, the hole is very big and the focus depth is very short. When you change an f-stop on your camera, you also change how much light gets to the image sensor. And when you're shooting in manual, if you were to stop down, that is go to a smaller hole or bigger number, without correcting your exposure through the ISO of the sensor or your shutter speed, you'll get a darker and darker image. So to go from this picture at f2 to this picture at f5.6, I went from a shutter speed of 1/125th in the first image to 1/15th in the second. And that corrected the exposure back to the same exposure as for f2. And then the final image here, which has even more focus in it, is shot at f11. And that was shot at 1/4 of a second. These are all at ISO 200, but I have the advantage of being on a tripod, so I can go to 1/4 of a second without shake in the image. A common mistake that people make when doing this assignment is they refocus the picture rather than just change the f-stop and correct the exposure and leave the focus alone. And when you do that, you might get something like this, where now the background is beautifully sharp, but the foreground has gone out of focus. This was shot at f5.6. I'll review these one more time. We go back. This was the f11, this was f5.6, and f2 exposures. Now I never achieved in this particular setup the books being completely sharp. That wasn't important in this situation, but it may be, and I'll give you tips on how to do that later on. It is determined somewhat by the combination of exposure elements as well as the focal length of your lens and where you're focusing too. But here's f5.6, f11, and then the picture where the person had refocused. Actually, the person here was me, refocused on the background as an example of what not to do. You can see from this picture that very short depth of field can be very creative. This picture of a baby just focused on his feet. Or there are times when you want everything in focus, and controlling that f-stop is an important part of being a photographer. And that's what we're up to in this class. That's it. Let me know if you have questions, and I look forward to seeing your pictures.